John Holmes's heart races as he bursts into the xenobiology lecture hall, acutely aware that he's interrupting Professor Cleo's class. The pack-led alien's striking features turn towards him, her large eyes narrowing slightly at the disturbance. John mumbles an apology and quickly takes his seat, feeling the curious glances of his alien classmates. Professor Cleo clears her throat, her melodious voice carrying across the room. As I was saying, we have a groundbreaking research opportunity that I'd like to discuss with you all. She pauses, her gaze sweeping across the diverse array of students. It involves a crucial aspect of pack-led reproductive biology. The class falls silent, all eyes fixed on the professor. John leans forward, his initial embarrassment forgotten as curiosity takes hold. Pack-led females, Professor Cleo continues, require assistance from other species to express our nutrient-rich mammary secretions. These secretions are vital for our offspring's development and have shown promising applications in advanced medical treatments across various species. A ripple of murmurs passes through the classroom. John's mind races considering the implications of such a discovery. Professor Cleo raises a hand, silencing the chatter. I need a volunteer for a private research session. This will involve manually stimulating my mammary glands to collect samples for our study. The room grows tense with a mix of excitement and apprehension. John's pulse quickens as he processes the professor's words. He glances around, noting the hesitation on his classmates' faces. Before he can fully think it through, John's hand shoots up. He surprises himself with his eagerness, driven by a potent combination of scientific curiosity and a desire to impress the formidable alien professor. Professor Cleo's eyes lock onto John, a hint of approval in her expression. Excellent. We'll discuss the details after class, Mr. Holmes. As the lecture concludes, John approaches Professor Cleo's desk with a mix of anticipation and nervousness. She explains the project's importance for interspecies understanding and its potential benefits for humanity. John listens intently, his initial reservations giving way to a sense of purpose. I've scheduled a private session in my laboratory for tomorrow evening, Professor Cleo informs him, her tone professional yet tinged with excitement. You'll be provided with specialized protective gear and data collection equipment. As John leaves the classroom, his mind whirls with thoughts of the unconventional assignment ahead. He grapples with a cocktail of emotions, excitement at the scientific opportunity, nervousness about the intimate nature of the task, and ethical concerns about the boundaries they'll be pushing. Unbeknownst to John, a rival alien student watches him from the shadows, jealousy simmering beneath the surface. As John disappears down the corridor, the student begins to whisper to nearby classmates, spreading rumors about the true nature of the project and hinting at plans to report it to the university's ethics board. John, oblivious to the brewing controversy, heads to his dormitory to prepare for the most challenging and potentially groundbreaking research experience of his academic career. Little does he know that his actions in the coming days will not only test his own boundaries, but could reshape the landscape of interspecies relations throughout the galaxy. The following morning, John woke with a mix of anticipation and nervousness churning in his stomach. As he made his way to the Galactic University campus, his mind raced with thoughts of the upcoming research session with Professor Cleo. He envisioned the specialized protective gear and data collection equipment, wondering how the experience would unfold. Upon entering the main hall, however, John's preoccupations evaporated. An unusual commotion filled the air, drawing his attention to a crowd of alien students gathered around a holographic display. At the center stood Zaxthor, the Vexorian student from John's xenobiology class, his shape-shifting form rippling with smug satisfaction. John's heart sank as he approached the group. The holographic display showed a doctored image of him and Professor Cleo in a compromising position. Text scrolled beneath, accusing them of engaging in inappropriate interspecies relations under the guise of research. "What is this?" John demanded, pushing through the crowd to confront Zaxthor. The Vexorian's eyes glinted with malice. "Just exposing the truth, Holmes. I've already filed a formal complaint with the university's ethics board." John's fist clenched at his sides. "This is a lie, and you know it." Zaxthor leaned in, his voice low. "I should have been chosen for that research project. It was my chance to advance my career, to secure a position on the Galactic Science Council. but you had to ruin everything. Realization dawned on John. This wasn't just about jealousy. It was calculated sabotage. Without another word, he turned and sprinted towards Professor Cleo's office, his footsteps echoing through the corridors. He burst through the door out of breath. "Professor, we have a problem." Professor Cleo looked up from her desk, her large eyes filled with distress. "I know, Mr. Holmes. I've just received a summons from the ethics board." John's stomach dropped. "How bad is it?" The pack-led alien's voice trembled slightly. "If they take this complaint seriously, it could end my career. And you could be expelled from the university." John's mind raced. "We need to prove our innocence. The image Zaxthor is spreading, it's fake. We can prove that, right?" Professor Cleo nodded, her composure returning. "Indeed. My species possesses advanced imaging analysis technology. We can identify the manipulation markers in the doctored image." As the professor began her analysis, John paced the office. "We need more. Something to discredit Zaxthor completely." An idea struck him. "My roommate, Mike, he's a wizard with galactic information systems. He might be able to dig up some dirt on Zaxthor." Professor Cleo looked up sharply. "Be careful, Mr. Holmes. We must not stoop to unethical methods ourselves." John nodded, already pulling out his communicator. "Understood, Professor. We'll tread carefully." As he explained the situation to Mike, John could hear the excitement in his roommate's voice. "A chance to hack a Vexorian's records? I'm in. Give me a few hours." The rest of the day passed in a blur. John and Professor Cleo worked tirelessly, preparing their defense and reaching out to potential allies. They contacted Dr. Zenra, a respected pack-led biologist from a neighboring university, hoping to secure expert testimony on the ethical nature of their research. As evening fell, tensions on campus had reached a fever pitch. Students gathered in small groups, debating the scandal in hushed tones. John overheard snippets of conversation as he made his way back to his dormitory. "I always thought there was something off about that Holmes guy," one tentacled alien whispered. "But Professor Cleo? She's always been so professional," another countered. John quickened his pace, desperate to escape the gossip. He found Mike hunched over his hollow computer, fingers flying across the interface. "Tell me you found something," John said, collapsing onto his bed. Mike spun in his chair, a triumphant grin on his face. "Oh, I found something all right. Our shape-shifting friend has been a very naughty alien." He pulled up a holographic display showing a hidden folder from Zaxthor's personal data cloud. Previous academic fraud, blackmail attempts against other professors. It's all here. John's eyes widened. "This is exactly what we need. But how do we use it without revealing your hacking?" Mike's grin faded. "That's the tricky part. We'll need to find a way to lead the ethics board to this information without implicating ourselves." As they brainstormed late into the night, John's communicator chimed. It was a message from the university administration. The ethics board hearing had been scheduled for the following morning. John stared at the message, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. In just a few hours, he would face the most important confrontation of his life. The fate of his academic career, Professor Cleo's reputation, and their groundbreaking research all hung in the balance. He turned to Mike, perseverance etched on his face. "We've got one night to figure this out. Let's get to work." As they delved into planning their strategy, the first rays of dawn began to peek through the dormitory window. The campus stirred to life, unaware of the drama about to unfold in the ethics board chamber. John steeled himself for the challenges ahead, knowing that the next few hours would shape not just his future, but potentially the course of interspecies relations throughout the galaxy. The night passed in a blur of frantic preparation. As the first light of dawn crept through the dormitory window, John and Mike exchanged a determined look. They had done all they could to prepare for the hearing. Now it was time to face the music. John met Professor Cleo outside the Galactic University's Grand Assembly Hall. The imposing dome-shaped structure loomed before them, its crystalline surface catching the early morning light. The professor's large eyes reflected a mix of apprehension and grit. "Are you ready, Mr. Holmes?" she asked, her melodious voice tinged with concern. John nodded, straightening his posture. As ready as I'll ever be, Professor. They entered the hall together, immediately enveloped by a cacophony of alien voices and the rustle of various appendages. Hundreds of beings from across the galaxy filled the tiered seating, their eyes, stalks, and sensory organs, all trained on the central platform where the ethics board sat. The 5 senior professors who comprised the board represented a diverse array of species. Their chairs were specially designed to accommodate their unique physiologies, from the gelatinous Zorblon to the towering insectoid hive mind of Sector 7. As John and Professor Cleo took their seats at the defendants' table, a hush fell over the assembly. The head of the ethics board, a wizened Andorian with skin like polished blue marble, activated a holographic display. "This hearing is now in session," the Andorian's voice reverberated through the hall. "We will first hear from the accuser, Zax Thor of Vexoria." Zax Thor slithered to the center of the platform, his form rippling with awe-inspiring satisfaction. With a flourish, he activated a holographic projector, filling the air above him with the doctored image of John and Professor Cleo. "Esteemed members of the board," Zax Thor's voice oozed confidence, "what you see before you is evidence of a grievous breach of ethics. Under the guise of scientific research, these two have engaged in inappropriate interspecies relations, sullying the reputation of our esteemed institution." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. John clenched his fists under the table, fighting the urge to stand up and shout his innocence. Professor Cleo placed a calming hand on his arm, her touch cool and reassuring. As Zax Thor continued his character assassination, John scanned the crowd. He spotted Mike near the back, giving him a subtle thumbs up. Their plan was in motion. When Zax Thor finally concluded his venomous speech, the head of the ethics board turned to John and Professor Cleo. "You may now present your defense." Professor Cleo rose gracefully, her tall form commanding attention. She activated her own holographic display, showcasing the original research proposal in intricate detail. "Honored members of the board," she began, her voice clear and steady, "the accusations leveled against us are not only false, but also a dangerous misrepresentation of vital scientific work." She walked the board through the proposal, highlighting the potential benefits for both PACLID and human medicine. As she spoke, John noticed several board members leaning forward. Their interest piqued. "And now," Professor Cleo continued, "I will demonstrate the specialized equipment designed for this research." With practiced ease, she assembled a complex array of tubes, sensors, and protective gear. The clinical nature of the setup was undeniable, a far cry from the salacious implications of Zax Thor's accusations. As Professor Cleo concluded her presentation, a new hologram flickered to life beside her. The distinguished form of Dr. Zenra, the PACLID biologist, materialized. "Greetings, esteemed colleagues." Dr. Zenra's holographic form bowed slightly. "I am here to confirm the legitimacy and importance of this research. The study of PACLID mammary secretions has far-reaching implications for xenobiology and medicine." Dr. Zenra's testimony carried significant weight, evident in the nodding heads of the ethics board members. As the hologram faded, John knew it was his turn to speak. He stood, his heart pounding, but his voice steady. "Members of the board, there's something else you need to know." John revealed the evidence of Zax Thor's past academic fraud and blackmail attempts, carefully framing it as information from an anonymous source. The shocked gasps from the audience were nothing compared to the looks of dismay on the faces of the ethics board. Zax Thor, his smug demeanor crumbling, leapt to his feet. "Lies, all lies!" he screeched. In a desperate move, Zax Thor's form began to ripple and shift. Within seconds, an exact replica of John stood before the assembly. "It was him," the imposter John pointed at the real one. "He's the one who committed those frauds, trying to frame me." Chaos erupted in the hall. Spectators stood on their seats, craning to get a better view of the two identical humans. The ethics board members conferred hurriedly, clearly at a loss. Amidst the pandemonium, Professor Cleo's voice cut through the noise. "I can prove which one is the real John Holmes." All eyes turned to the PACLID professor as she explained the differences in human and Vexorian heart rates under stress. She called both Johns forward, her hand outstretched. The real John stepped up without hesitation, his eyes locked on Professor Cleo's. The imposter Zaxthor, however, hesitated, his confident facade cracking. Professor Cleo placed her hand on John's chest first, then on the imposter's. Her large eyes widened as she turned to the ethics board. "This," she said, her hand resting on the real John's chest, "is the true John Holmes. His heart rate is consistent with a human under stress. The other is an imposter." The fake John's form rippled, revealing Zaxthor's true appearance. With a howl of rage, he attempted to flee, but security drones quickly surrounded him, their energy fields immobilizing the shapeshifter. As Zaxthor was led away, the head of the ethics board rose. "In light of this evidence, we unanimously clear John Holmes and Professor Cleo of all charges. Furthermore, we officially sanction their research project and recommend severe disciplinary action against Zaxthor." The assembly hall erupted in applause. John and Professor Cleo shared a look of relief and joy, their ordeal finally over. As the crowd began to disperse, the university chancellor approached them, his expression apologetic. "On behalf of the university, I offer my sincerest apologies," the chancellor said. "To make amends, we're granting additional funding and resources for your research." As they left the assembly hall, John and Professor Cleo were bombarded with requests for interviews from various galactic media outlets. News of the dramatic hearing had spread faster than a quantum transmission. "It seems our work has garnered quite a bit of attention," Professor Cleo observed, her tone a mix of excitement and trepidation. John nodded, feeling both exhilarated and overwhelmed. "I guess we'll have to figure out how to handle this newfound fame, along with our research." As they made their way through the crowd, John couldn't help but feel that their journey was just beginning. The challenges of their groundbreaking research lay ahead, along with the complexities of their evolving relationship. But for now, as they stepped into the bright galactic university morning, John allowed himself a moment of pure relief. They had overcome this hurdle, and whatever came next, they would face it together. Together, John thought, whatever challenges lay ahead, they would tackle them as a team. The following days passed in a whirlwind of activity. The Galactic University Administration, eager to capitalize on the positive publicity from the ethics board hearing, organized a press conference to showcase John and Professor Cleo's groundbreaking research. As they prepared for the event, John found himself spending more time with the PAC-led professor, their conversations extending beyond the realm of academics. On the morning of the press conference, John arrived at the university's state-of-the-art media center. The sleek, oval-shaped building pulsed with holographic displays and swarms of hover drones, capturing every angle for the galactic news networks. As John navigated the controlled chaos, a familiar voice called out to him. "Ah, Mr. Holmes, there you are." John turned to see Professor Cleo approaching, her large eyes bright with excitement. She was accompanied by an older human man with salt and pepper hair and a neatly trimmed beard. "John, I'd like you to meet Dr. Lyra," Professor Cleo said, gesturing to the man. "He's a renowned xenobiologist who's agreed to collaborate on our project." Dr. Lyra extended his hand, his grip firm and enthusiasm evident. "It's a pleasure to meet you, John. I've been following your work with great interest. The potential applications of your research are truly exciting." As they discussed the finer points of their study, a university aide ushered them towards the main stage. The auditorium buzzed with activity, filled with journalists from various alien species. Tentacled Hadarans adjusted their recording devices, while bioluminescent Zygons pulsed with anticipation. John took his place at the podium, flanked by Professor Cleo and Dr. Lyra. As he began the presentation, he noticed Professor Cleo fidgeting nervously with her datapad. Catching her eye, John offered a reassuring smile, which she returned warmly. Their presentation flowed smoothly, with John explaining the potential medical applications of PAC-led mammary secretions, while Professor Cleo detailed the intricacies of the extraction process. Dr. Lyra provided context on the broader implications for interspecies medicine. As they fielded questions from the audience, John couldn't help but feel a sense of pride in their accomplishments. The diverse group of journalists seemed genuinely intrigued by the research, their questions probing and insightful. Following the press conference, the university hosted a reception in the Botanical Gardens. The air was filled with the sweet scent of alien flora, and bioluminescent insects danced between the gathering of academics and diplomats. John found himself engrossed in conversation with a group of Andorian scientists when he overheard a nearby exchange between two alien diplomats. Their voices were low, but John's translator picked up fragments of their discussion. Humans gaining access to advanced pack-led biology. Certain factions within the Galactic Council are concerned. John's attention was drawn away from the conversation as he spotted Professor Cleo speaking with an unfamiliar pack-led. The newcomer's body language was intense, her focus on Professor Cleo unwavering. As John approached, he caught the tail end of their conversation. "Mice would be honored to join your research team," the pack-led woman was saying. "My expertise in pack-led physiology could be a valuable asset." Professor Cleo noticed John and waved him over. "John, this is Genra. She's expressed interest in joining our project." Genera turned to John, her large eyes appraising him coolly. "Mr. Holmes, your work is intriguing." Something in Genera's tone made John uneasy, but he pushed the feeling aside and engaged in polite conversation. As they talked, John couldn't help but notice the way Genera's gaze lingered on Professor Cleo, a hint of possessiveness in her demeanor. The reception continued, with John circulating among the guests. He was deep in conversation with a Tellarite physicist when Dr. Lyra appeared at his elbow, his expression grave. "John, might I have a word in private?" the older scientist asked, his voice low. They moved to a quiet corner of the garden, partially obscured by a large pulsating fungal growth. Dr. Lyra's usual jovial demeanor had been replaced by a look of concern. "I received an anonymous message this morning," Dr. Lyra began, his voice barely above a whisper. "It warned me to withdraw from the project. There were threats." John felt a chill run down his spine. "Have you reported this to security?" Dr. Lyra shook his head. "Not yet. I wanted to speak with you first. I suspect there may be more at stake here than just scientific discovery. We need to be cautious, John." As the reception wound down, John found himself on a secluded balcony overlooking the university's bioluminescent gardens. The alien flora pulsed with soft, otherworldly light, creating a serene atmosphere that belied the turmoil in John's mind. He sensed Professor Cleo's presence before he saw her. She joined him at the railing, her large eyes reflecting the shimmering lights below. "Quite a day," John said, breaking the comfortable silence. Professor Cleo nodded, her tentacles swaying gently. "Indeed. I never imagined our research would generate such interest." Their conversation flowed easily, moving from the events of the day to more personal topics. Professor Cleo shared her experiences as a pack-led in academia, the challenges she'd faced and overcome. John found himself opening up about his own dreams and aspirations, his desire to bridge the gap between species through scientific understanding. As they talked, John became acutely aware of their proximity, the subtle warmth radiating from Professor Cleo's alien form. Their eyes met, and for a moment the rest of the galaxy seemed to fade away. The spell was broken by the sudden appearance of Genra. The pack-led scientist's arrival was so abrupt that John wondered if she had been lurking nearby, waiting for an opportunity to interrupt. "Professor Cleo, Mr. Holmes," Genra said, her voice tinged with urgency. "I apologize for the interruption, but I've made a discovery that could have significant implications for your research." Genra produced a datapad, her fingers flying across the surface as she pulled up a series of complex diagrams and charts. "I've been analyzing the data from your preliminary trials, and I've found something unexpected." John and Professor Cleo leaned in, their earlier moment of intimacy forgotten as they focused on the information before them. Genra's findings suggested that the pack-led mammary secretions might have unforeseen effects on human physiology, potentially granting enhanced abilities or even increased longevity. As they discussed the implications of this new data, a university security drone approached, its blue light pulsing urgently. "Professor Cleo," the drone's metallic voice intoned, "there's been a security breach in your laboratory. Surveillance footage shows an unidentified intruder attempting to access your research data." Without hesitation, John, Professor Cleo, and Genra rushed towards the lab, their minds racing with possibilities and fears. As they hurried through the university's winding corridors, John couldn't shake the feeling that they were on the precipice of something far larger and more dangerous than they had ever anticipated. The laboratory door slid open with a hiss, revealing a scene of controlled chaos. Equipment lay scattered across the floor, and several storage units stood open, their contents clearly rifled through. John's eyes darted around the room, taking in the extent of the damage. Professor Cleo moved swiftly to the main computer terminal, her tentacles flying over the holographic interface as she assessed the damage to their data. "The main servers appear to be intact," she reported, relief evident in her voice. "But several experimental samples are missing." As Genra assisted Professor Cleo, John began a careful sweep of the lab. His gaze fell upon a workstation in the corner, something catching his eye. Crouching down, he noticed a small, unfamiliar device tucked beneath the station's edge. With a sinking feeling, he realized what it was: an advanced listening device. "Professor," John called out, his voice tight, "I think we have a bigger problem than just a break-in. Someone's been spying on us." As he held up the device, the gravity of their situation became clear. The stolen samples, the listening device, the threats against Dr. Lyra. It all pointed to a coordinated effort to undermine their research. John met Professor Cleo's gaze, seeing his own concern mirrored in her large eyes. The night stretched on as they worked to secure their remaining data and samples. University security drones hovered at the lab's entrance, their presence a constant reminder of the threat they now faced. As John and Professor Cleo huddled over a holographic display, cross-referencing their data with the inventory of missing samples, he became acutely aware of their proximity. The stress of the situation seemed to heighten his senses, making him hyper-aware of every subtle movement, every shared glance. Genra's voice cut through the tension. "We should consider the possibility of an inside job," she said, her tone measured. "The intruder knew exactly where to find our most valuable samples." John nodded, his mind racing. "We need to limit access to the lab, set up additional security measures, and we should be careful about who we trust with information about our research from now on." As they continued to work, formulating plans to protect their work and identify the intruder, John couldn't help but feel the weight of the challenges ahead. Their groundbreaking research had become entangled in a web of scientific rivalry, political intrigue, and personal ambitions. The stolen samples and the hint of their unexpected effects on human physiology added a new layer of complexity to an already volatile situation. With the immediate crisis managed, John, Professor Cleo, and Genra gathered around the lab's central holotable. The tension in the room was palpable as they began to discuss their next steps. "We need to identify the intruder and their motives," John said, his voice low and determined. "But we can't let this derail our research. We've come too far to give up now." Professor Cleo nodded in agreement, her large eyes filled with a mix of concern and dedication. "We'll need to be more careful than ever. Our work could change the face of interspecies medicine, but it's clear that not everyone wants us to succeed." As they continued to plan, John couldn't help but notice the subtle undercurrents of tension between Professor Cleo and Genra. The latter's intense focus on the pack-led professor hadn't waned, and John found himself wondering about Genra's true motivations for joining their team. The first rays of the alien sun began to peek through the lab's windows, signaling the start of a new day. As John looked at his colleagues, he realized that their scientific endeavor had transformed into something far more complex and dangerous than they had ever anticipated. With threats lurking both outside and potentially within their team, the path forward would require not just scientific brilliance, but also courage, trust, and perhaps a bit of interstellar intrigue. Diplomacy. The challenges ahead would require more than just their scientific acumen. They would need to navigate a complex web of interstellar politics and personal relationships. As the sun rose fully, casting an otherworldly glow through the lab's reinforced windows, John, Professor Cleo, and Genra set about implementing heightened security measures. They worked tirelessly, installing advanced biometric scanners and energy shields around the perimeter of the laboratory. These new scanners should detect any unauthorized attempts to access the lab, John explained, adjusting the settings on a sleek metallic panel. Only our team's unique biosignatures will be recognized. Professor Cleo nodded approvingly, her tentacles moving gracefully as she calibrated the energy shield controls. Excellent work, John. We can't afford another security breach. As they finalized the new security protocols, a fleet of university security drones arrived, their silvery bodies hovering silently outside the lab's entrance. The head of campus security, a stern-faced Andorian named Commander Threll, approached the team. By order of the university administration, these drones will patrol the area continuously, Threll announced, his antennae twitching with barely concealed agitation. The significance of your project has not gone unnoticed. With the immediate security concerns addressed, John and Professor Cleo turned their attention to the next phase of their research. They set up a controlled environment within the lab for the mammary gland stimulation process, a task that required meticulous preparation and a level of intimacy neither had anticipated. John donned specialized protective gear, the form-fitting suit designed to prevent any accidental exposure to the pack-led secretions. As he helped Professor Cleo position herself comfortably, he couldn't help but notice the graceful curves of her alien physiology. "Are you ready?" John asked, his voice slightly muffled by the protective mask. Professor Cleo's large eyes met his, a mix of professional commitment and something deeper, more personal, reflected in their depths. "Yes, let's proceed." As John carefully assisted in the collection process, he found himself hyper-aware of every point of contact between them. The intimacy of the procedure brought a newfound closeness, a tension that simmered just beneath the surface of their professional interactions. Their focus was abruptly shattered when Professor Cleo's skin began to emit a soft, bioluminescent glow. The sudden change startled them both, causing John to nearly drop the collection vial. "Cleo, your skin, it's glowing," John exclaimed, his scientific curiosity immediately piqued. Professor Cleo examined her arms, her tentacles waving in a pattern that John had come to recognize as excitement. "This is unprecedented. Pack-led biology has never displayed bioluminescent properties before." They rushed to analyze the freshly collected samples, their earlier intimacy momentarily forgotten in the face of this new discovery. As they pored over the data, a startling revelation emerged. "John, look at this," Professor Cleo called, her voice tinged with awe. "There are trace amounts of Zeta-9 in the secretion samples." John's eyes widened as he processed the information. "Zeta-9? But that compound is incredibly rare. Its potential for cellular regeneration across species is, well, it's revolutionary." As they delved deeper into their analysis, the lab door slid open, revealing Dr. Xander Voss. The human geneticist strode in with an air of confidence that bordered on arrogance, his piercing gaze immediately fixing on the glowing samples. "I couldn't help but overhear," Voss said, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "It seems congratulations are in order. You've made quite the breakthrough." John and Professor Cleo exchanged wary glances. Dr. Voss's reputation for pushing ethical boundaries in his genetic research was well known throughout the scientific community. "Dr. Voss," John acknowledged, his tone cautious. "I wasn't aware you were on campus." Voss waved a hand dismissively. "News travels fast, especially when it comes to discoveries of this magnitude. I'd like to offer my expertise to your team. My work in cross-species genetic manipulation could be invaluable in understanding the full potential of these secretions." Before John or Professor Cleo could respond, Genera stepped forward, her large eyes narrowed slightly. "Perhaps we should discuss this as a team before making any decisions about expanding our research group." As the tension in the room mounted, a series of urgent beeps emanated from the security console. John rushed to check the display, his heart racing as he read the incoming alert. "We've got an unidentified spacecraft entering the planet's atmosphere," he announced, his voice tight with concern. "It's heading straight for the city." The team gathered around the holographic display, watching as the mysterious ship descended through the swirling clouds. As it touched down on the outskirts of the city, John felt Professor Cleo's tentacle brush against his hand, a gesture of reassurance that sent a jolt of electricity through his body. "Whatever happens next," she said softly, her eyes meeting his, "we're in this together." John nodded, acutely aware of the warmth of her touch and the soft glow still emanating from her skin. As they prepared to face this new development, he realized that their research had set in motion events that would challenge not only their scientific understanding, but also the very nature of their relationships and the future of interstellar cooperation. The lab fell into a tense silence as they awaited news of the mysterious visitors, each team member lost in their own thoughts about the potential consequences of their groundbreaking discovery. The glow of Professor Cleo's skin seemed to pulse gently, a visible reminder of the unknown territory they were entering, both scientifically and personally. The tense atmosphere in the lab was suddenly shattered by the blaring of alarms. Red lights flashed across the room as a stern voice echoed through the intercom system. "Attention all personnel. Unidentified spacecraft has landed. All research staff report to the high-security meeting room immediately." John and Professor Cleo exchanged worried glances. The mysterious ship they had spotted earlier had finally touched down, and now they were being summoned to face whatever had emerged from it. "We'd better move," John said, his voice tight with apprehension. "Dr. Voss, Genra, you're with us." As they hurried through the corridors, the glow from Professor Cleo's skin cast an eerie light on the metallic walls. Security drones buzzed overhead, their sensors scanning for any potential threats. Upon reaching the high-security meeting room, they found it already occupied by a group of imposing figures. At the center stood Elder Zara, a pack-led female whose presence commanded immediate attention. Her eyes, filled with ancient wisdom, swept over the research team as they entered. "Welcome!" Elder Zara's voice resonated with authority. "We have much to discuss about the nature of your discovery." John felt a chill run down his spine as Elder Zara began to explain the true nature of the pack-led mammary secretions. The compound, she revealed, contained dormant nanites, an advanced technology that had been part of pack-led biology for millennia. These nanites, when activated, can enhance physical and mental capabilities. Elder Zara continued, her gaze intense. But they also pose significant risks. Without proper control, they could alter the genetic structure of other species, leading to unforeseen consequences. The revelation sent shockwaves through the room. Dr. Voss leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with nearly unleashed excitement. "The potential applications are staggering," he breathed. "We must accelerate our research immediately." Dr. Lyra, who had been listening intently, shook her head. "We need to proceed with caution," she argued. "The risks are too great to rush into this blindly." As the debate intensified, John found his attention drawn to Professor Cleo. A strange sensation washed over him, and suddenly he could hear her thoughts as clearly as if she were speaking aloud. "John, can you hear me?" Her mental voice was tinged with awe and a hint of fear. He nodded slightly, careful not to draw attention to their silent exchange. "I can. How is this possible?" Before she could respond, Elder Zara's voice cut through their mental link. "The nanites are already at work within you," she said, her eyes fixed on John and Professor Cleo. "Your connection is growing stronger." The implications of this development sent John's legs shaking. He struggled to focus on the ongoing discussion as the university administration announced new containment protocols. The laboratory was to be placed under strict quarantine, with key team members required to remain inside for observation and continued research. As days passed in isolation, the effects of prolonged exposure to the nanite-infused secretions became more pronounced. John marveled at his newfound strength and accelerated healing abilities, while Professor Cleo learned to manipulate her bioluminescence, creating dazzling displays of light and energy. Their psychic bond deepened, allowing them to share not just thoughts, but emotions and sensations. This intimacy brought them closer than ever before, blurring the lines between their professional and personal relationships. The team worked tirelessly, studying the nanites and their effects under Elder Zara's guidance. However, their progress was suddenly interrupted when Genra collapsed during a research session. "Something's wrong," John called out as he rushed to Genra's side. Medical scanners revealed a startling truth. Her pack-led physiology was undergoing rapid changes, as if the nanites were attempting to upgrade her to match the advanced state of the ancient pack-led civilization. As they struggled to stabilize Genera, Elder Zara approached John and Professor Cleo with a grave expression. "There is a way to control this," she said solemnly. "A ritual that would allow you to fully merge with the nanite technology. It could give you the ability to direct its effects, but at great personal cost." John's heart raced as Elder Zara explained the risks. The merging process could result in the loss of their individual identities, transforming them into entirely new beings with the combined knowledge of human and pack-led civilizations. As John and Professor Cleo grappled with this life-altering decision, alarms blared throughout the facility. Security systems flashed warnings of multiple breaches, indicating a coordinated attack on the research center. Surveillance feeds revealed teams of heavily armed individuals attempting to infiltrate the quarantine zone. Their species and affiliations were unknown, but their intent was clear. They were after the nanite technology. "We need to move now," John shouted, his enhanced strength allowing him to easily lift and carry the unconscious Genra. Professor Cleo's skin pulsed with brilliant light, temporarily blinding their attackers as the team raced through the corridors. As they barricaded themselves in the central laboratory, John and Professor Cleo shared a moment of silent communication. The weight of their decision pressed down upon them, even as the sounds of battle echoed from beyond the sealed doors. They knew that whatever choice they made would not only determine their own fate, but potentially that of the entire galaxy. The attackers' weapons began to breach the laboratory's defenses. Time was running out. John looked into Professor Cleo's eyes, seeing his own mix of fear and drive reflected back at him. Together, they turned to Elder Zara, ready to face whatever came next. John felt Professor Cleo's tentacle tighten around his hand as they shared a moment of silent understanding. With a nod, they sprang into action. "Everyone, follow me," John called out, his voice carrying an authority he'd never possessed before. "We have a secure panic room in the West Wing." The team moved swiftly through the corridors, the sound of energy weapons growing louder behind them. John led the way, supporting the still unconscious Genera, while Professor Cleo brought up the rear, her bioluminescent skin pulsing with an intensity that momentarily disoriented their pursuers. They reached the panic room just as the first of the intruders rounded the corner. Dr. Lyra punched in the access code with trembling fingers, and the reinforced door slid open. The team rushed inside, the door sealing shut behind them with a reassuring hiss. "Activate all defense systems," John commanded, gently laying Genera on a nearby cot. The room hummed to life, holographic displays flickering into existence around them. Dr. Voss moved to one of the monitors, his eyes widening as he took in the images. "Look at this," he said, his voice a mix of fear and fascination. "They're not just one species." The screen showed their attackers clearly now, a diverse group of aliens, each wearing identical black armor that obscured most of their features. They wielded sleek energy weapons, methodically working their way through the facility. Elder Zara's expression darkened as she studied the footage. "The Galactic Shadow Syndicate," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "They seek to obtain advanced technologies by any means necessary." The gravity of the situation settled over the room like a heavy blanket. John and Professor Cleo exchanged a look, their psychic link buzzing with shared thoughts and emotions. "We need to do something," Professor Cleo said aloud, her tentacles writhing with nervous energy. "We can't just hide here and hope they go away." Elder Zara stepped forward, her eyes fixed on John and Professor Cleo. "There is a way," she said solemnly. "The merging ritual I spoke of earlier. It could give you the power to face this threat." John felt a surge of both excitement and trepidation. What exactly does this ritual entail? As Elder Zara explained the process, the panic room's defenses shuddered under the increasing assault from outside. Alarms blared, warning of imminent breach. "We don't have much time," Dr. Lyra said, her fingers flying over a control panel as she attempted to reinforce the shields. John looked at Professor Cleo, seeing his own mix of emotions reflected in her alien eyes. With a shared nod, they made their decision. "We'll do it," they said in unison. Elder Zara guided them to the center of the room, instructing them to sit facing each other. As they clasped hands, tentacles intertwining, the elder began to chant in an ancient Pack-led dialect. The air around them seemed to thicken, charged with an otherworldly energy. John felt the nanites in his system responding, vibrating with increasing intensity. Professor Cleo's skin glowed brighter, bathing the room in pulsating light. As the ritual progressed, John's body began to change. His muscles tightened and grew more defined, his skin taking on a subtle metallic sheen. He could feel his mind expanding, filling with knowledge he'd never possessed before. Professor Cleo underwent her own transformation. The patterns of light beneath her skin became more complex, swirling in hypnotic patterns. Her eyes shifted, becoming kaleidoscopes of color that seemed to contain entire galaxies. Their psychic link deepened, thoughts and memories flowing freely between them. John saw glimpses of ancient pack-led cities, felt the weight of millennia of history. Professor Cleo experienced the vibrant diversity of Earth's cultures, the relentless drive of human curiosity. Just as the ritual reached its peak, a loud crash reverberated through the room. The main door buckled, sparks flying as the Syndicate's weapons finally breached their defenses. In that moment of crisis, Genra stirred on her cot. "The shields," she mumbled, her voice weak but urgent. "I can help." Dr. Lyra rushed to Genra's side, quickly grasping her idea. "Her altered biology," she explained hurriedly to Dr. Voss. "We might be able to use it to boost our defenses." As they worked to integrate Genra's bioelectric field into the room's systems, John and Professor Cleo completed their transformation. They stood, their bodies radiating power, just as the panic room door finally gave way. Syndicate forces poured into the room, weapons raised. Without a word, John and Professor Cleo moved in perfect synchronization. John extended his hand, and suddenly the gravity in the room shifted. The intruders found themselves lifted off their feet, pinned to the walls and ceiling. Professor Cleo's tentacles whipped through the air, emitting controlled bursts of energy that disabled the Syndicate's weapons and communication devices. The attackers, caught off guard by this display of power, struggled futilely against their invisible bonds. As John and Professor Cleo neutralized the immediate threat, they became aware of a familiar presence attempting to access the lab's mainframe. Through their enhanced perception, they sensed Dr. Voss's betrayal even before they saw him hunched over a computer terminal. "Dr. Voss," John called out, his voice resonating with newfound authority. "Step away from the console." Voss whirled around, his face a mask of defiance and fear. "You don't understand," he sputtered. "The potential of this technology, it's too great to be controlled by any one group." Professor Cleo raised a tentacle, and an energy bubble formed around Voss, cutting off his access to the system. "We understand more than you know," she said, her voice echoing with the wisdom of ages. With the immediate danger contained, John and Professor Cleo turned their attention to the rest of the facility. Through their shared consciousness, they could sense the locations of the remaining Syndicate forces scattered throughout the building. "We need to secure the entire university," John said, his mind already formulating a plan. Professor Cleo nodded, her swirling eyes focusing on the holographic display of the campus. "We can use the nanites to extend our control to the security systems," she suggested, the idea flowing seamlessly between their linked minds. As they prepared to leave the panic room, John and Professor Cleo paused, suddenly overwhelmed by the full realization of their transformation. They were no longer simply human and pack-led, but something entirely new, their thoughts and emotions inextricably bound together. "Are you ready?" John asked, the question unnecessary but comforting in its familiarity. Professor Cleo's tentacle wrapped around his hand, a gesture that now felt as natural as breathing. "Always," she replied, her voice resonating in both their minds. Together they stepped out into the corridor, their bodies glowing with nanite energy, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. As they moved through the facility, neutralizing threats and securing areas, they began to formulate a larger plan to protect not just their research, but the entire university, and perhaps the future of human-alien relations itself. As John and Professor Cleo moved through the facility, neutralizing threats and securing areas, their merged consciousness buzzed with newfound potential. They ascended to the central tower, their bodies pulsing with nanite energy, ready to defend the university from this elevated vantage point. Standing atop the tower, they surveyed the campus sprawled beneath them. John's enhanced vision picked out the scattered Syndicate forces, while Professor Cleo's tentacles undulated with almost unchecked energy. "We need to protect the entire university," John said, his voice resonating in both their minds. Professor Cleo nodded, her kaleidoscope eyes swirling with grit. Together, she replied, both vocally and telepathically. They joined hands, their nanite-infused bodies humming in perfect harmony. As they focused their combined will, a shimmering energy began to coalesce around them. It started as a small sphere, then rapidly expanded outward, growing to encompass the entire campus. The dome took shape, a mesmerizing tapestry of bioluminescent patterns dancing across its surface. It was a visual representation of their merged knowledge, human ingenuity intertwined with ancient pack-led wisdom. With the immediate threat contained, John and Professor Cleo began a methodical sweep of the university grounds. Their enhanced senses allowed them to pinpoint the locations of remaining syndicate operatives with uncanny precision. As they moved, their bodies continued to evolve. John felt his muscles tense and ripple, his agility increasing exponentially. He leapt between buildings with ease, covering distances that would have been impossible before. Professor Cleo's energy manipulation abilities grew more refined. Her tentacles whipped through the air, releasing precisely controlled pulses that disabled syndicate weapons and communication devices without harming the operatives themselves. They worked in perfect synchronization, their shared consciousness allowing them to anticipate each other's moves. Where John's enhanced strength overwhelmed groups of attackers, Professor Cleo's energy manipulation rendered their technology useless. As they cleared the surface levels, their heightened perception detected an anomaly beneath their feet. John placed his hand on the ground, feeling vibrations that shouldn't have been there. "Underground," he said, his eyes meeting Professor Cleo's swirling gaze. They found a hidden entrance and descended into the university's subterranean levels. The couple moved silently through dimly lit corridors, their nanite-enhanced bodies adapting to the new environment. John's skin developed a chameleon-like quality, blending with the shadows, while Professor Cleo's bioluminescence dimmed to avoid detection. They came upon a heavily fortified door, clearly of syndicate design. Professor Cleo extended a tentacle, interfacing directly with the locking mechanism. In seconds, the door slid open, revealing a high-tech command center. Inside, holographic displays flickered with data streams and tactical overlays. John and Professor Cleo moved swiftly, incapacitating the surprised syndicate operatives before they could raise an alarm. As they accessed the syndicate systems, a flood of information washed over them. Their merged consciousness processed the data at an incredible speed, uncovering a web of conspiracy that extended far beyond this single attack. "Corrupt Galactic Council officials," John murmured, his palms sweating from the implications. Professor Cleo's tentacles twitched with agitation. "They want to weaponize our research," she added, her voice tight with concern. As they delved deeper into the files, a strange sensation overtook them. Their memories began to blur, individual experiences melding together. John found himself recalling childhood moments on a pack-led world he had never visited, while Professor Cleo experienced the thrill of a first kiss through human lips. They pulled back from the data stream, momentarily disoriented. "Our minds," John said, struggling to separate his thoughts from the collective. "They're merging further." Professor Cleo's kaleidoscope eyes focused on John, concern evident in their swirling depths. "We need to be careful," she said, her tentacle gently squeezing his hand. "We can't lose ourselves entirely." As they grappled with this new development, their enhanced senses detected a massive energy signature entering the planet's orbit. They shared a look of understanding. The syndicate was escalating its assault. "We need to get back to the team," John said, already moving towards the exit. They raced through the underground complex, their bodies adapting to maximize speed and efficiency. As they emerged onto the campus grounds, they saw the first signs of the orbital assault, energy beams lancing down from the sky, impacting harmlessly against their protective dome. John and Professor Cleo sprinted towards the research facility, their minds already reaching out to their teammates. They burst into the lab, finding Dr. Lyra coordinating with university security, while Gennara interfaced directly with the lab's computer systems, her altered pack-led biology allowing her to enhance their defenses. "We need to extend our abilities," Professor Cleo announced, her tentacles gesturing to encompass the entire team. John nodded, continuing the thought. A partial merge, to give us all enhanced abilities while maintaining our individual identities. The team exchanged looks of uncertainty and excitement. Dr. Lyra stepped forward first. "I'm in," he said firmly. One by one, the others agreed. Even Dr. Voss, still contained in his energy bubble, offered his cooperation. John and Professor Cleo stood at the center of the group, their nanite-infused bodies glowing with intensity. They reached out, both physically and mentally, initiating the partial merge. Energy flowed between them all, nanites reconfiguring and enhancing each individual. Dr. Lyra gasped as his mind accelerated, complex equations and theories unfolding before him with crystal clarity. Jenra's connection to the lab's systems expanded exponentially, allowing her to control multiple functions simultaneously. As the process completed, John and Professor Cleo surveyed their newly enhanced team. Each member glowed with nanite energy, their bodies and minds upgraded to face the coming threat. "The Syndicate warship is in orbit," John announced, his enhanced senses detecting the massive vessel above them. Professor Cleo's tentacles gestured towards the lab equipment. "We need to repurpose everything we have. Turn this lab into a defense center." The team moved with newfound purpose and ability, modifying equipment and integrating systems at an incredible pace. As they worked, the impacts against the energy dome grew more intense, the sky above filled with the ominous presence of the Syndicate warship. John and Professor Cleo stood at the head of their small but formidable team, their bodies humming with nanite energy, minds united in purpose. As the first wave of Syndicate forces began their descent through the atmosphere, the enhanced research team prepared to defend not just their work, but potentially the fate of the entire planet. The battle for Earth was about to begin, and at its center stood a group of merged human and alien minds, their glowing forms a beacon of hope against the encroaching darkness. The glowing forms of John, Professor Cleo, and their enhanced team stood ready as the Syndicate warship loomed ominously in the sky above. The protective dome shimmered with increased intensity, a testament to their combined efforts. John's enhanced senses detected the first wave of attack ships breaching the outer layers of their defenses. "They're coming," he announced, his voice resonating through their shared consciousness. Professor Cleo's tentacles whipped through the air, manipulating holographic displays. "Activating secondary shields," she said, her kaleidoscope eyes fixed on the incoming threat. The team moved with unprecedented coordination, their merged minds allowing for instantaneous communication and decision-making. John sprinted across the campus, his body a blur of motion as he deployed energy shield generators at strategic points. Each placement was calculated to maximize coverage and minimize vulnerabilities. Meanwhile, Professor Cleo interfaced directly with the university's power grid. Her tentacles pulsed with energy as she redirected power flows, channeling every available watt into their makeshift defenses. The air crackled with electricity, and the shield generators hummed to life under her expert manipulation. Dr. Lyra stood at the center of their impromptu command center, his eyes darting rapidly between multiple data streams. His accelerated cognitive functions allowed him to process information at an astounding rate. "Attack pattern Alpha 7, he called out. "They're targeting our northern quadrant." Jenra, her body now a hybrid of pack-lead and cybernetic components, interfaced directly with the university's communication systems. Her fingers danced across holographic keyboards as she initiated complex algorithms. "Jamming their frequencies," she reported. "Syndicate ships are losing formation." The sky above the campus erupted in chaos as Syndicate attack ships engaged their defenses. Energy beams lanced downward, only to be deflected by the reinforced shields. Explosions bloomed against the protective dome, each impact sending ripples of energy across its surface. John and Professor Cleo's merged consciousness expanded suddenly, reaching out beyond their immediate team. They sensed the fear and confusion of the trapped students and faculty across the campus. In that moment, they made a decision. "We need more help," John said, his eyes meeting Professor Cleo's swirling gaze. She nodded, understanding immediately. "A partial merge," she agreed, "just enough to coordinate our efforts." Their nanite-infused bodies glowed brighter as they extended their influence. Across the campus, volunteers among the students and faculty felt a sudden surge of energy. Their bodies tingled as limited nanite enhancements granted them increased strength, speed, and a connection to the team's shared consciousness. As the newly empowered volunteers joined the defense efforts, the tide of the battle began to turn. Syndicate forces, faced with unexpected resistance, faltered in their advance. Suddenly, a blinding flash lit up the sky. An electromagnetic pulse struck the university, its energy rippling through the nanite network. John and Professor Cleo staggered, their merged consciousness abruptly separating. "John!" Professor Cleo called out, her tentacles flailing as she struggled to maintain her balance. "I'm here," he responded, shaking his head to clear the disorientation. "Our connection, it's weakened." Before they could fully recover, alarms blared throughout the facility. Dr. Lyra's voice cut through the chaos. "Intruders in the main research lab!" John and Professor Cleo shared a look of persistence. Despite their temporarily diminished abilities, they moved in unison towards the heart of the facility. As they approached the lab, they heard the sounds of a scuffle within. To their surprise, they found Dr. Voss engaged in a desperate struggle against a squad of syndicate elite troops. The former traitor had used his limited connection to the nanite network to slow down the intruders, buying precious time for the team to respond. As their nanite abilities reactivated, John and Professor Cleo burst into action. John's enhanced strength allowed him to grapple with multiple opponents simultaneously. He ducked under a swinging energy baton, using the attacker's momentum to throw him into his comrades. Professor Cleo's tentacles whipped through the air with deadly precision. She focused her energy manipulation abilities, sending pulses that short-circuited the Syndicate's advanced weaponry. Sparks flew as rifles and energy pistols clattered uselessly to the ground. In the midst of the melee, Professor Cleo made a startling discovery. As she reached out to deflect an incoming attack aimed at John, she felt a surge of energy flow between them. Suddenly, John moved with even greater speed and strength, effortlessly overpowering his opponent. "John," she called out mentally, "I can boost your abilities." Understanding flowed between them as they rediscovered their synchronization. They moved as one, constantly shifting and sharing their nanite enhancements. John would surge forward with unmatched strength, then seamlessly switch to manipulating energy fields as Professor Cleo took on the role of the physical powerhouse. The Syndicate squad, caught off guard by this dynamic fighting style, found themselves quickly outmatched. Within minutes, the intruders lay unconscious or restrained, their mission thwarted. As John and Professor Cleo caught their breath, they became aware of a commotion outside the lab. Dr. Lyra's voice echoed through their shared consciousness. "We have a plan to take out the warship." They raced outside to find the rest of the team gathered around a holographic display of the university's particle accelerator. Dr. Lyra's eyes gleamed with excitement as he explained his improvised weapon concept. Genra was already interfacing with the accelerator's controls, her cybernetic enhancements allowing her to navigate the complex systems with ease. "We need to modify the emitters," she reported. "The current configuration won't generate enough power." John and Professor Cleo stepped forward, their merged minds instantly grasping the intricacies of the plan. "We can use our nanite abilities to reconfigure the hardware," John said. Professor Cleo's tentacles were already reaching out towards the accelerator's components. "If we reroute the power through the secondary cooling systems, we can amplify the output," she added. The team worked with frantic energy, acutely aware of the Syndicate warship looming above them. John and Professor Cleo moved in perfect harmony, their nanite-enhanced bodies allowing them to make adjustments at an incredible pace. As the final modifications were completed, a sense of anticipation filled the air. John and Professor Cleo stood at the main control panel, their hands intertwined. The rest of the team took up positions around them, each ready to play their part in this daring plan. "Energy levels at maximum," Genra reported, her voice tense. Dr. Lyra's fingers flew across a series of holographic displays. Targeting systems locked on the warship's main reactor. John and Professor Cleo shared a final look, their merged consciousness filled with a whirlwind of emotions. With a synchronized motion, they initiated the firing sequence. The university's central tower hummed with power, energy crackling along its length. A brilliant beam of concentrated particles erupted from the modified accelerator, streaking towards the Syndicate warship. The sky lit up as if a second sun had suddenly appeared. As the beam made contact with the warship, a blinding flash enveloped the massive vessel. The team shielded their eyes, the intensity of the light overwhelming even their enhanced senses. When the glare subsided, they looked up to see the Syndicate warship still hovering in the sky, encompassed by a flickering energy field. For a moment, silence fell over the campus as they waited to see the results of their desperate attack. John and Professor Cleo stood at the center of their team, their bodies still glowing with nanite energy. Their merged minds raced with calculations and possibilities as they braced themselves for the warship's response. The fate of their research, the university, and potentially the entire planet hung in the balance as they waited to see if their gambit had succeeded. Succeeded in disabling the Syndicate warship. A blinding flash erupted from the vessel, followed by a series of thunderous explosions that shook the very air around them. The team watched in awe as the massive ship began to break apart, pieces of its hull peeling away like the skin of an overripe fruit. "We did it!" Dr. Lyra exclaimed, his eyes wide with disbelief. But John and Professor Cleo's merged consciousness quickly detected a new threat. "Escape pods," John announced, his voice tense. "They're launching from the ship." Professor Cleo's tentacles whipped through the air as she manipulated the holographic displays. "Multiple trajectories. They're going to land all around the campus perimeter." The team sprang into action, their nanite-enhanced bodies glowing with renewed purpose. John's enhanced senses scanned the falling debris, calculating impact zones and potential weak points in their defenses. "Genera, redirect power to the northwestern quadrant," he ordered. "That's where the heaviest pieces will hit." The hybrid pack-lead nodded, her cybernetic components interfacing directly with the university's power grid. Energy surged through the protective dome, reinforcing it just as a massive chunk of the warship's hull slammed into the barrier. The impact sent ripples of blue light cascading across the shield, but it held. Professor Cleo turned to Dr. Lyra, her kaleidoscope eyes spinning with urgency. "We need weapons. Anything you can cobble together from the lab equipment." Dr. Lyra nodded, his mind already racing with possibilities. "I can modify some of the particle emitters into handheld energy weapons. Give me 10 minutes. As Dr. Lyra set to work, John and Professor Cleo reached out with their merged consciousness, connecting with the partially enhanced volunteers across the campus. They could sense the fear and determination radiating from the students and faculty who had joined their cause. "Listen carefully," John's voice echoed in their minds. "Syndicate ground forces will be here soon. Find defensive positions and prepare for combat." Professor Cleo added, "Remember your training. Use the nanite enhancements to your advantage, but don't overexert yourselves. We're stronger together." As the team prepared for the coming assault, John and Professor Cleo found themselves experiencing an unsettling side effect of their prolonged merger. Their individual thoughts began to blur, memories and personalities intertwining in a confusing tapestry. "Cleo," John said, his voice uncertain, I can't remember which of us grew up on Earth. Was it you or me?" Professor Cleo's tentacles curled in agitation. "I'm not sure. John, this is becoming dangerous. We need to find a way to stabilize our merger." Dr. Voss, who had been monitoring their vital signs, stepped forward. "I might have a solution," he said, his voice hesitant but determined. "The quantum entanglement device in the main lab. We could use it to stabilize your merged consciousness, maybe even allow you to separate at will." John and Professor Cleo shared a look of both hope and apprehension. "It's risky," John said, "but necessary," Professor Cleo finished. "We can't lead effectively if we can't distinguish our own thoughts." Before they could discuss further, alarms blared throughout the facility. Genera's voice cut through the chaos. "Syndicate forces have landed. Multiple breach points detected." John and Professor Cleo moved as one, their glowing forms streaking across the campus. They arrived at the eastern perimeter just as a group of Syndicate shock troops broke through the outer defenses. The elite soldiers were equipped with sleek black armor that seemed to absorb light, and they wielded weapons that crackled with anti-nanite energy. Without hesitation, John launched himself into the fray. His enhanced strength sent him soaring through the air, landing in the midst of the Syndicate squad. He moved with impossible speed, dodging energy blasts and delivering devastating blows that sent armored bodies flying. Professor Cleo focused her abilities on defense, creating shimmering barriers of energy to protect the student volunteers who had taken up positions behind makeshift barricades. Her tentacles lashed out, intercepting Syndicate weapons and shorting them out with precise bursts of energy. As the battle intensified, John and Professor Cleo found themselves instinctively switching roles. One moment, John was manipulating energy fields, while Professor Cleo engaged in close-quarters combat. The next, they had seamlessly swapped positions, their merged consciousness allowing for perfect coordination. But even as they fought, they could feel their individual identities slipping further away. The confusion grew, threatening to overwhelm them in the heat of battle. "We need to undergo the stabilization process now," Professor Cleo said urgently, as she deflected a barrage of enemy fire. John nodded, his fist blurring as he incapacitated another Syndicate soldier. "Agreed, but we can't leave our forces undefended." They reached out through their nanite network, connecting with Dr. Lyra and Genra. "We need to undergo the quantum entanglement procedure," John explained rapidly. "Can you hold the line?" Dr. Lyra's voice came back, tense but confident. "We've distributed the modified weapons. Go! We'll keep them busy." With a final surge of energy that sent nearby Syndicate troops stumbling backward, John and Professor Cleo disengaged from the battle. They raced towards the main research laboratory, their merged form leaving a trail of shimmering light in their wake. They burst into the lab to find Dr. Voss making final adjustments to the quantum entanglement device. The machine hummed with barely suppressed power, its core pulsing with an otherworldly blue glow. "Are you sure about this?" Dr. Voss asked, his face etched with concern. John and Professor Cleo stepped into the specially designed chamber without hesitation. "We don't have a choice," they said in unison, their voices overlapping in an unsettling harmony. As Dr. Voss activated the device, John and Professor Cleo felt a rush of energy unlike anything they had experienced before. Their merged consciousness expanded, then contracted, cycling through a kaleidoscope of memories and sensations. They saw flashes of John's childhood on Earth, the first time he looked up at the stars and dreamed of exploring them. They felt the exhilaration of Professor Cleo's first successful cross-species communication, the moment she realized the vastness of galactic diversity. The process was intense, bordering on painful. Their nanite-enhanced bodies glowed brighter than ever, tendrils of energy arcing between them and the quantum entanglement device. Through it all, they clung to the core of who they were, individually and together. Outside the chamber, the battle for the university raged on. Dr. Lyra led a group of enhanced volunteers in a desperate defense of the main research laboratory. His accelerated cognitive functions allowed him to analyze and predict the Syndicate's tactics, but the enemy's advanced weaponry was taking a toll. Genra's voice crackled over the communication network, strained but determined. "Syndicate forces are converging on the lab. We can't hold them much longer." Inside the quantum entanglement chamber, John and Professor Cleo felt the stabilization process nearing its end. Their separate consciousnesses began to reemerge, distinct yet still intimately connected. As the energy field around them dissipated, they realized that their nanite enhancements had been refined, strengthened by the procedure. They stepped out of the chamber, their bodies pulsing with newfound power. Immediately, they sensed the peril facing their team. Without a word, they moved in perfect synchronization towards the lab's exit. As they prepared to rejoin the battle, John turned to Professor Cleo. Their eyes met, a universe of understanding passing between them in an instant. With their enhanced abilities now under greater control, they felt ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The sounds of combat grew louder as they approached the lab's main doors. Energy weapons discharged, and the cries of both defenders and attackers filled the air. John and Professor Cleo shared one final look, their merged minds focused on a single purpose. Together, they burst through the doors, their glowing forms a beacon of hope for the beleaguered defenders. The Syndicate forces, on the verge of breaching the lab, faltered at the sight of the newly empowered duo. John and Professor Cleo moved as one, their nanite-enhanced bodies blurring with speed. They waded into the thick of the fight, determined to put an end to the syndicate's assault once and for all. The fate of the university, their groundbreaking research, and potentially the future of human-alien relations hung in the balance as they engaged the enemy with renewed vigor. Vigor and purpose. As they engaged the enemy, their newly stabilized nanite enhancements surged with power, allowing them to move with unprecedented speed and precision. John's fist connected with a syndicate soldier's chest, the impact sending the armored figure flying backwards into a group of his comrades. Professor Cleo's tentacles whipped through the air, creating shimmering energy barriers that deflected incoming fire and protected their allies. As they fought, John and Professor Cleo realized that their shared consciousness had evolved. They could anticipate each other's movements with perfect accuracy, their actions seamlessly complementing one another. It was as if they were two parts of a single, unstoppable force. "The lab!" Dr. Lyra's voice crackled over their communicators. "They're breaching the main research facility." Without a word, John and Professor Cleo disengaged from their current skirmish and raced towards the heart of the campus, their nanite-enhanced bodies blurred with speed, leaving trails of shimmering energy in their wake. As they approached the research laboratory, they encountered a group of syndicate elite troops. These soldiers were outfitted with sleek black armor that seemed to absorb light, and they wielded weapons that crackled with ominous energy. "Anti-nanite tech," John observed, his enhanced senses picking up the subtle frequencies emanating from the weapons. Professor Cleo's kaleidoscope eyes spun rapidly as she analyzed the threat. "We'll need to be cautious. One direct hit could disrupt our enhancements." The syndicate troops opened fire, filling the air with crackling bolts of energy. John and Professor Cleo moved in perfect synchronization, dodging the barrage with inhuman agility. John leapt high into the air, coming down in the midst of the enemy formation with earth-shaking force. The impact sent several soldiers stumbling, giving him the opening he needed to engage in close combat. Meanwhile, Professor Cleo focused on defense and crowd control. Her tentacles wove intricate patterns in the air, creating overlapping energy fields that deflected incoming fire and disrupted the syndicate's targeting systems. With precise bursts of energy, she short-circuited the anti-nanite weapons, rendering them useless. As the battle intensified, John and Professor Cleo found themselves tapping into new depths of their abilities. John's strength and speed seemed to increase with each passing moment, allowing him to incapacitate multiple opponents with rapid-fire strikes. Professor Cleo discovered she could manipulate energy on a more fundamental level, creating localized distortions that confused and disoriented the enemy. The syndicate troops, realizing they were outmatched, began to fall back. John and Professor Cleo pressed their advantage, driving the enemy further away from the research laboratory. As they fought, they became aware of a subtle change in their nanite enhancements. The microscopic machines were adapting, evolving in real time to counteract the syndicate's anti-nanite technology. With the immediate threat neutralized, John and Professor Cleo rushed into the research laboratory. Inside, they found Dr. Lyra and a group of enhanced volunteers desperately trying to hold off the main syndicate assault. The air was thick with energy discharges and the acrid smell of overheated equipment. John and Professor Cleo didn't hesitate. They plunged into the fray, their combined abilities turning the tide of the battle. As they fought, they extended their nanite network to encompass their allies, temporarily boosting the abilities of the volunteers. The defenders, reinvigorated by this surge of power, pushed back against the syndicate forces with rekindled commitment. But even as they gained the upper hand, John and Professor Cleo sensed a new threat emerging. Their enhanced perception detected a low, building hum emanating from the center of the syndicate formation. As they fought their way closer, they saw a group of enemy technicians hastily assembling a large, cylindrical device. "EMP!" Dr. Voss shouted from across the lab, his eyes wide with alarm. "They're going to try to disable our nanite tech." John and Professor Cleo shared a moment of silent communication, their merged minds quickly formulating a plan. They began to channel their combined energy into a unified field around the EMP device, containing its building charge. The effort was immense, causing visible strain on their nanite-enhanced bodies. As they struggled to maintain the containment field, Dr. Voss approached them, his face etched with concern and commitment. "I have an idea," he said, his voice tense. "We can use the quantum entanglement technology to create a feedback loop within the EMP. It should cause it to implode, but it's dangerous," Professor Cleo finished, her tentacles writhing with the effort of maintaining the energy field. John nodded, his mind focused. "We don't have a choice. Do it." Dr. Voss sprang into action, quickly modifying the EMP device while John and Professor Cleo held it in check. The lab around them was chaos, with energy blasts and shouts filling the air. But in the eye of the storm, the three worked with focused intensity. As the EMP reached critical levels, John and Professor Cleo poured their combined nanite abilities into the quantum entanglement field. The air crackled with energy, and a blinding light filled the lab. In the final moment before the implosion, John instinctively moved to shield Professor Cleo, their nanites working in overdrive to protect them both. The device imploded with a thunderous crash, releasing a shockwave of quantum energy that rippled through the lab. When the light faded and the dust settled, John and Professor Cleo found themselves still standing, though visibly weakened. The syndicate forces lay scattered and unconscious around them. As they surveyed the aftermath, John and Professor Cleo became aware of a strange fluctuation in their shared consciousness. Their mental link seemed to waver, connecting and disconnecting in rapid succession. And in the spaces between, they sensed something new, a third presence emerging within their merged minds. This new consciousness carried with it a vast repository of knowledge, blending human and pack-led insights in ways they had never imagined. As they grappled with this unexpected development, John and Professor Cleo realized that their victory over the syndicate was just the beginning of a much larger journey. The lab fell quiet, the sounds of battle fading into an uneasy silence. John and Professor Cleo stood amidst the destruction, their bodies still glowing faintly with nanite energy. As they looked at each other, a universe of questions reflected in their eyes. What would this new presence mean for their relationship, for their research, for the future of human-alien relations? As the dust settled around them, one thing became clear. The challenges they had faced today were only the prelude to a much greater adventure. With their evolving abilities, their deepening bond, and the ancient knowledge now at their disposal, John and Professor Cleo stood on the threshold of a new era, one that would test them in ways they could scarcely imagine. As the implications of their experience sank in, John and Professor Cleo exchanged a meaningful glance, silently acknowledging the monumental task that lay ahead. In the days that followed, the university campus buzzed with activity as cleanup and reconstruction efforts began in earnest. John and Professor Cleo threw themselves into the work, their nanite-enhanced bodies allowing them to assist with heavy lifting and delicate repairs alike. As they worked, they found themselves constantly aware of the third presence in their shared consciousness, a vast repository of knowledge that seemed to hum just beneath the surface of their thoughts. Late one night, as they sat in the partially restored laboratory, Professor Cleo's tentacles idly manipulating a holographic display of nanite structures, John voiced the question that had been on both their minds. "What do you think it is?" he asked, his eyes fixed on the shimmering particles of light. "This other consciousness?" Professor Cleo's kaleidoscope eyes spun thoughtfully. "It feels ancient," she replied, her voice tinged with awe. "Like we've tapped into some kind of collective pack-led wisdom. But there's more to it, scientific knowledge far beyond what we currently possess." As if in response to their discussion, the nanites in their bodies surged with energy, causing their skin to glow faintly in the dimly lit lab. John and Professor Cleo gasped in unison as a flood of information cascaded through their minds, equations and schematics and theories beyond their wildest imaginations. "We need to share this," John said, his voice filled with excitement and grit. "The implications for medicine, for space exploration, for interspecies cooperation, it's staggering." Professor Cleo nodded, her tentacles writhing with enthusiasm. "A symposium," she suggested. "We'll invite researchers and diplomats from across the galaxy. This knowledge doesn't belong to just us. It could benefit all sentient beings." Over the next few weeks, as the university slowly returned to normal operations, John and Professor Cleo worked tirelessly to organize the Galactic Symposium. They sent out invitations, prepared presentations, and continued to explore the depths of their newfound knowledge. The day of the symposium arrived, and the university's grand auditorium was filled to capacity with beings from dozens of different species. The air hummed with anticipation as John and Professor Cleo took the stage, their bodies glowing softly with nanite energy. "Esteemed colleagues," John began, his voice carrying easily through the vast space, "what we are about to show you represents a quantum leap in our understanding of nanotechnology and its potential applications." Professor Cleo stepped forward, her tentacles gesturing gracefully as she spoke. "We have discovered a way to refine and control the nanite technology using principles derived from pack-led physiology, specifically the medicinal properties of pack-led mammary secretions." A murmur of interest rippled through the crowd. John and Professor Cleo proceeded to demonstrate the incredible healing properties of their enhanced nanites, using holographic displays to show accelerated cellular regeneration and the repair of damaged tissues. As they moved on to showcase the nanites' potential for environmental restoration, something unexpected occurred. The nanites in their bodies began to pulse with increased intensity, their glow becoming brighter and more vibrant. "John," Professor Cleo said, her voice tight with a mixture of excitement and apprehension, "I think something's happening." Before John could respond, a swirling vortex of bioluminescent energy erupted around them. The audience gasped and drew back, but John and Professor Cleo remained calm, instinctively understanding that this was a natural progression of their symbiosis with the nanites. As the energy whirled around them, John felt his body changing, adapting. He could sense Professor Cleo undergoing a similar transformation beside him. The third consciousness, the ancient pack-led wisdom that had been guiding them, seemed to pulse in time with the swirling energy. When the vortex finally dissipated, John and Professor Cleo stood transformed. Their bodies had become perfect syntheses of human and pack-led physiology, glowing with an inner light that pulsed in sync with their heartbeats. They turned to face each other, marveling at their new forms. John's skin now had a faint iridescent sheen, and his eyes glowed with an inner light that spoke of vast intelligence. Professor Cleo's tentacles had become more defined, each one capable of manipulating energy on a fundamental level. Her kaleidoscope eyes now spun with even greater complexity, reflecting the wealth of knowledge they now possessed. The audience was stunned into silence, then erupted into a cacophony of excited chatter and awed exclamations. John and Professor Cleo, now fully integrated with the ancient pack-led consciousness and the advanced nanite technology, turned back to face the crowd. "What you have just witnessed," John said, his voice resonating with newfound power and wisdom, "is the next stage in the evolution of our research." Professor Cleo nodded, her tentacles weaving complex patterns in the air. "With this transformation, we have gained unprecedented control over the nanite technology. Allow us to demonstrate its true potential." Over the next hour, John and Professor Cleo amazed the assembled scientists and diplomats with displays of the nanite's capabilities. They purified a tank of contaminated water in seconds, repaired damaged plant specimens, and even neutralized a sample of harmful radiation. As the demonstration came to an end, John and Professor Cleo stood hand in hand at the center of the stage. The audience was silent, the implications of what they had just witnessed sinking in. "We stand at the threshold of a new era," John announced, his voice filled with conviction. "An era of unprecedented cooperation and scientific advancement." Professor Cleo continued, "To that end, we propose the establishment of a new galactic institute dedicated to the responsible development and application of this technology." The auditorium erupted in applause and cheers. As the sound washed over them, John and Professor Cleo shared a look of deep understanding and love. Their journey, which had begun with a simple research project, had led them to this moment, and to each other. As the applause continued, John leaned in close to Professor Cleo, their nanite-enhanced bodies glowing in harmony. "I never imagined this is where we'd end up when I first asked to milk you," he said with a soft laugh. Professor Cleo's eyes spun with affection and amusement. "The universe works in mysterious ways, my dear John," she replied, "and I, for one, am excited to see where this new chapter takes us." With the symposium drawing to a close and the foundation laid for their new galactic institute, John and Professor Cleo prepared to embark on the next phase of their journey. The challenges ahead were many, but with their combined knowledge, abilities, and the strength of their bond, they felt ready to face whatever the future might hold.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.